Welcome to Generation Gap Sports, a look into the world of sports as seen through the colorful eyes of our gang of six. Ranging in age from 25 to 70, we take you on a journey to sports heaven, discussing everything from the real to the nonsensical. We're family, and like in any family, when we don't all bleed the same team colors, the talk can get personal. So here we go with Sportscast 3, uncorked, unvarnished, unrestrained, unrepentant, unseemly, and utterly unlike anything you've ever experienced before. Let's meet the family. From oldest to youngest, we've got Bob, yours truly, John, Charlie, Bobby, Benny, and Nick. All right, let's dig in. To live or not to live? Live golf, the biggest controversy in all professional sports. Or is it a sport? Is Tiger Woods merely a once-in-a-generation athlete who captures the imaginations of millions by playing a game? Or is he like Michael Jordan, the complete competitor and champion of sport? Nick, is golf a game or is golf a sport?
Well, John, I think it can be both depending on who's playing it. For some of our weekend warriors, I think it's a perfect game to get outside, enjoy some time with friends. But as for a sport, as for Tiger Woods, his greatness, I think it's absolutely a sport. When you think about what sports are, it's a combination of strength, speed, endurance, coordination, and mental toughness. While not every sport encapsulates all of those, let's take baseball for example. There's definitely coordination, but some guys get it down without a whole lot of speed, maybe some degree of strength. And take football. Really depends on the position. If you're a quarterback, there's obviously a lot of mental skill there. Maybe you don't have to be super fast. So there's a kind of wide-ranging amount of skills there. I think golf, obviously there's not a lot of endurance or running kind of speed. But I think in terms of coordination, and golf's up there with any of the sports in terms of how much it requires. Then if we're going to talk about mental acuity, golf is up there as well. The amount of time between every shot compared to the amount of time actually swinging the golf club, a lot of room for mental errors or for mental triumph. So yeah, with that said, I think golf's absolutely a sport.
Nick, you made an interesting point there regarding today's professional golfers versus the weekend warriors. How about the average guy who downs a Bud Light and plays softball on the weekend? Is he playing a game or is he playing a sport?
I think those are some of our best athletes, actually. Hiding in plain sight, really.
Okay. Geez, Bobby, you got a little smirk on your face. What's going on? What are you thinking?
So initially, when I was thinking about this question, I looked at the Olympics. I was like, okay, if golf is a sport, it should be in the Olympics. It is in the Olympics. But then I looked at the list of Olympic events, and you see things like race walking, and it's hard to really make a good argument that all of those are real legit sports. In golf, there's really no physical contact. You can have players competing at a pretty high level in their 50s and 60s. But then I started thinking about it a little more, and you look at a guy like Tiger Woods, hard to say that guy's not an athlete. So I was kind of on the fence and kind of toiling back and forth. Ultimately, what I'm settling with is golf is a sport, light. It's a sport, but just barely.
Interesting distinction. Bob, you're kind of the resident historian on this panel here, but what's your take on this? Is golf a sport or is it merely a game?
I think we're having this debate because it's an interesting question. Golf has a long and rich history and tradition. It was pretty much an upper crust sport for a long time. Still tends that way, but it's much more democratic than it once was. I guess for me, the question comes down to, well, how different is golf from bowling or croquet or darts? all of which demand most of the attributes that you would expect from a golfer: concentration, competitive nature, consistency of form and delivery. Croquet also involves walking, not quite as much, but croquet players do carry their own mallets around the course. They don't have someone else doing it for them, and they don't ride carts from hole to hole to hole. Dart players also participate unassisted. Look, I absolutely agree. Tiger Woods is an athlete. Is he an athlete who happens to play golf, or is he a great athlete because he's a great golfer? That, to me, is open to some debate. Obviously, we got to nuance this a little bit. I would tend to put some sports in a category with an asterisk because they're different. They're not demanding in the physical intensity of some of the other sports: basketball, football, hockey, baseball. Demand moments, at least, when you go into hyperdrive and are working as furiously as you can. They're also aerobically demanding and can be fairly exhausting. So there are some sports that demand a bit more. I would put an asterisk next to some of them, and golf might be one. I think it's a terrific game, even though I'm terrible at it. Maybe there's a little bias coming in from there, but golf is different. Golf is different in a way. It's in a category entirely by itself. I'll leave it there.
Charlie, when you go back to your childhood, you were Pee-wee. You beat two other little kids to win the National Left-Handed Championship. Now, judging by the photos of the competition there, you might not totally understand the tremendous athleticism of your competitors and yourself. But if you look in hindsight, you look forward to where you are today, you look at the great golfers, there seems to be a distinction being made between what an athlete's supposed to look like versus the competition that they're in. But also seems to ring true: the better the athlete, typically the better competitor in this sport or game. What's your read?
Well, one take would be the physical nature of golf has changed a lot over the years. I've played golf actively for probably 45 years now. And if you look at the best guys in the game, and in fact, if you look at most weekend warriors who really want to get better, they're putting every bit as much of a physically focused and one-time move like a shot putter would, or somebody swinging a baseball bat. I mean, when they're hitting that ball off the tee, they're delivering a club at 120 to 130 miles an hour. Way different from what the game used to be. And the game now is dominated by guys that can hit the ball a long way. So I do think, whereas golf still has all of the precision and touch and feel that it's always had, I think the more athletic parts of the game have become much more central than they used to be. The other thing I think that is really sets golf apart is when you look at some of the great moments in basketball, when a guy's trying to make free throws at the end of a game, end of a close game, or if a guy's kicking a field goal to win a big game, or they're doing penalty kicks in soccer. Some of the greatest moments in all of sports are unique in that they have this time period before you can pull the trigger. And I think Nick touched on it before, that downtime before you kick the field goal, or before you shoot the free throw, or before you take the club back, is often the time that determines whether you're going to be successful or not. And the mental strength that it takes, the calmness, the focus that it takes in those times to deliver, I think is unique in golf, because in golf it's happening multiple times per round. It's happening, and on the tour level, it might be the guy who's trying to win, the guy who's trying to make the cut, the guy who's trying to keep his tour card and keep his job for next year. It also happens every weekend with the weekend warrior who's trying to win $5 from his buddy. They feel almost the same level of nerves that the guy does on the PGA Tour. So to me, that aspect of the mental pressure that is there in golf much more than it is in most sports, really, I think, sets it apart. And maybe if it is a little bit less demanding on the physical side, although I would argue it's probably as demanding as baseball or probably even some track and field athletes. I mean, it takes a lot to throw a shot put, but you're only doing it maybe 6 times in a competition. All right. I think the mental side of golf really elevates it and makes it, if sports a combination of physical and mental, I think golf's right up there among the best.
Benny, if you look at golf and say baseball, I think most people would regard baseball as a sport, but you look back at baseball over the years, it wasn't that many years back, let's say 40, 50 years ago, when baseball was primarily played by fellows who maybe had great athletic ability, but carried a pot belly. Weren't necessarily, you wouldn't necessarily look at those people today and say those are tremendously well-conditioned athletes. Also, which is maybe true of the way people used to look at golfers. But also, if you look at a typical baseball player, his physical interaction within the game is quite limited. Matter of fact, he spends most of his time standing around. So in your mind, what is the distinction between, say, baseball and golf? Are they similar? Are they both games? Is either one a sport?
Well, there's a lot to unravel there, and I have a few things to say. This has been incredibly interesting listening to everyone's views. I think people made some good points. Some of the comparisons between golf and other sports, though, I think we might need to give some people some drug tests because some of these things seem a little out of touch with reality, but that's okay. Anyway, so I think, first off, golf and baseball is a good example, and probably an example a lot of people will immediately jump to because baseball is one of the more popular sports in terms of, it's America's pastime, for God's sakes. I would say baseball players, though, going back historically are better athletes than golfers. I mean, you do have outfielders that are doing sprints across open fields to dive, to jump for a ball. You have people sprinting to steal bases or sprinting to beat a ground out single. And, these things are happening all the time. Also, when someone's throwing a ball at 99 miles per hour, potentially, reacting to that, it's a little bit different than hitting a ball on a tee that's standing still. Certainly, you have to be, very technical to hit a golf ball. I've tried to hit a golf ball. Sometimes I can drive it and it goes really well. Sometimes it's hitting trees left and right. But no one's throwing a 90-mile-per-hour fastball at me. And trying to hit that is nearly impossible unless you have perfected, your craft. I can get lucky and smash a golf ball. I think lots of powerful people can potentially, but to hit a fastball, I mean, that's another level. I think to take this conversation, though, to a higher level, I think we really have to get at the definition of what a sport is. I hear a lot of people talk about, what they think sport is, but we do have definitions, encyclopedias. For example, Encyclopedia Britannica declares a sport being a contest or a game in which people do certain physical activities according to a specific set of rules and compete against each other. So under that very broad definition, lots of things are sports, which is why eating hot dogs is now a sport today. It's anything that requires you to do basically any movements with your body that is in some sort of competition can be considered a sport. But there's also a reason why, retirees play golf and not basketball or soccer or even baseball. You don't see many 70-year-olds playing baseball, but I do know my great-grandfather was playing golf well into his 80s. So, that's, I think, something we have to realistically understand. So maybe the better question, which I think we're kind of getting at to a certain extent, when we were talking about Tiger Woods, who certainly most would consider an athlete, is, are golfers athletes, not whether golf is a sport or not. And I think my dad hit the nail on the head when he was talking about, I think there's probably just golfers that just happen to also be athletes, but being an athlete is certainly not a requirement to be a golfer. Certainly you have to have strength, but you can have strength just naturally as well. But obviously if you build up your strength, that gives you an edge. I think Charlie made some good points about golfers being stronger at driving the ball over time. I think I do want to point out, though, when people are talking about difficulty of sports, ESPN years ago listed 60 sports based on the level of difficulty. Golf was ranked 51 out of 60. Baseball is in the top 20. So when we're comparing the two, clearly most sports experts do not see those as being near each other. So I think really we're just need to focus on whether golfers are athletes. And I would say, generally speaking, golfers don't need to be athletes, which I think is probably the best answer we can have. But golf is a sport, but I like Bobby's analysis of golf being sort of a light sport.
Okay. So let me ask you this. Is it possible to still be an older person and be 70, 80 years old and still be an athlete? Or is your definition of athlete someone younger in the prime of their life?
So an athlete can be at any age, but that doesn't mean you're a good athlete. Someone's grandma can go and play soccer. It doesn't mean that they're going to make a difference on the field. Anyone can
probably would.
Well, hopefully, anyone could be an athlete, technically, whether they're a real athlete or not, though. I mean, I think that depends on your competition. I think generally speaking, yes, everyone can play a sport, but that doesn't make them an athlete just because they're playing a sport. So anyone can play baseball, soccer, football, basketball, but that doesn't mean they're an athlete. Being an athlete means that you're playing at a high level. For example, we're talking about 7-year-olds. 7-year-olds are not playing in adult leagues. They're not playing adult league soccer very often or adult league basketball because they physically can't keep up or handle it. They can play golf, though, anytime because literally you're taking a cart going around to each hole, and you don't even, professional golfers, for example, don't even carry their own clubs. What I would like to see in golf is each person having to run to each hole and also carrying their clubs. Then you have golfers are athletes, man. Look at that. But no, they're not. They're sitting there. You can eat a cheeseburger between teeing off and drinking beers. You don't need to be a weekend warrior to be a golfer. Right? I mean, anyone can do that. So that would be my response.
Okay. You just cited ESPN and how they define difficulty for this particular analysis. The networks also, they broadcast other sports. And the sports with the largest on-site fan participation are not football, they're not baseball, they're not golf. The sports are Formula One, NASCAR. Now, tell me, are those sports? Are those athletes in those cars? Or is this just a game that you play on your jukebox or something?
Okay, so just to clarify, you said fan participation or what?
Fan on-site participation.
Okay. Well, I don't think what the audience is doing has anything to do with whether someone's an athlete or not. Living in Indianapolis, I have very high respect for people that drive in automobile racing. Obviously, the Indianapolis 500 here, super dangerous. You have to be super skilled at using a vehicle. But again, a 99-year-old can drive a car. And though they might not be racing because they mentally cannot do that, and they shouldn't do that, by the way. I don't consider someone sitting in a car and then just putting their foot on the pedal to be an athlete. I consider that to be someone that has mastered a game that is and it's a sport too. As I said before, it's a low bar to become a sport. But I don't consider them athletes just because they're driving a car. That doesn't require you to physically be, some type of gifted person in terms of your physical prowess, using incredible strength or speed or agility to do something.
Okay. I do believe that people who are familiar with drivers of these cars will tell you they are extremely intelligent, sophisticated, well-conditioned, mentally strong athletes.
Well, That sounds like
Also,
a mental stuff.
I would
Yeah.
suggest if you looked in Encyclopedia Britannica, they might have a different definition of what is a sport and whether or not, say, NASCAR or Formula One fits in that sport definition. Bob, what's your take?
Bringing driving into the discussion as a whole new element. I don't doubt that most drivers are reasonably fit, but it's not really an essential component of driving. You can be not particularly fit and still be a driver. But I guess that's a bit of a digression. Maybe it's an American thing to some degree. We like sports with lots of action and movement. We like events in which people compete directly against one another in an interactive way, not just attempting to perform a task. So again, that's what makes golf a little bit tricky to analyze. It's a terrific game, and it certainly has many of the elements of sport. I think that the mental psychological part is huge from a mental standpoint, and in terms of being able to develop touch and to have a perfect repetitive form. It's extraordinary. Maybe golf should be compared in some respects to something like diving, which is also highly technique driven. You do have to be pretty coordinated and reasonably athletic to be a diver. But we don't tend to think of divers that way because it's a single kind of event that is repeated over and over. But the great thing golf's got going for it is an awful lot of people can relate to it, partly because they can play it. And it's long been referred to as one of those life sports. So you don't have to think about giving it up, say when you turn 40 or 50 or whatever. You can keep going. So in viewed that way, it's one of the greatest sports. So I find myself conflicted when I think about golf.
Okay, Nick, we kicked this off with you. You gave us your take on it in terms of when golf is a game and when it becomes a sport. Have you assessed things differently? Listen to these arguments, or where do you stand now?
Yeah, a lot of interesting points made. I think going back to relating this back to Tiger Woods as an athlete and one of the greatest athletes. I think we all agree some of us might say he's an athlete playing a game. There's been an obvious decline in his game recent years, closely tied to pretty severe injuries that inhibit his athletic ability. So tying that back to whether or not golf is a game or a sport, I think it's pretty clear that the greatest in golf has seen his game suffer as a direct result of his decreased athletic ability. So yeah, I think golf's still a sport.
Okay, thanks, Nick. You get the last word on that. Let's switch topics here. It's time for our Tell Me in Two segment. Charlie, we got a round of drinks for tonight. Starting with you. Take us on a tour of what people are drinking tonight.
I'll lead it off. I think one of the great things about golf is that you can drink while you're playing the sport. I don't want to name names, but we've seen some sorry situations occur when someone among this group had a few too many in the golf course and frankly struggled to get the ball in the tee. So that said, tonight I'm enjoying a little bit of Angel's Envy bourbon. Okay. I like the bottle. Bottle's kind of a cool shape. It's 86 proof from Bardstown, Kentucky. And many bartenders would say it's the one of the smoothest bourbons available. Bobby, what do you have tonight?
Tonight, I'm having a little wine with our conversation. 14 hands, Run Wild Juicy Red blend from Columbia Valley in Washington. It's affordable, tastes good, goes with a lot of things, including this conversation, and I enjoy it.
How would you describe the flavor of that, Bob?
How would I describe the flavor of that? Well, it's neither sweet nor dry. So it occupies a place kind of like golf. You know, what exactly is it? It's got a nice red wine taste. What can I say?
Good. Let's go around the horn, Bobby.
Yeah, so I am sporting a beer from Minnesota this evening, hoping for a good omen for this coming weekend for the Frozen Four. I have the Surly Axeman IPA from the Surly Brewing Company in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Real good taste to it. A lot of hops, if you're familiar with what those are. And I'm hoping it'll bring us some luck for the Gophers this weekend.
Nick, I hoisted a few beers with you over the weekend. What do you have going now?
Yeah, I don't have the bottle with me, but it's the Knob Creek Old Fashioned. They make it for you already. It's ready to go for it, and you get to enjoy it.
Nice and visible drink.
Yeah, oh my god!
It's cool.
Wait, there we go.
And are you making that from scratch or from a mix?
Well, I guess I made it from scratch in the sense that I opened the bottle, I poured it into the glass itself.
Oh, you did?
They mix it themselves.
Cool. John, how about you?
You know, if you really like whiskeys, you got to start with the Irish. And you're not going to find a finer Irish whiskey than Jameson, unless you want to get engaged in the Bushmill versus Jameson debate, which I find actually a very, very interesting discussion. But that said, Jameson is just a wonderful whiskey. I typically drink it neat, sometimes on the rocks, but on a day like today, when it's beautiful here in Southern California and the Masters is about to kick off, I find this is an appropriate way to celebrate the week.
Danny, let you wrap it up.
There you go. Took you long enough. All right.
Yeah.
Well, today, everyone, for those at home watching and listening, our dear fans, I am drinking Alpha King, which pretty much sums it up. This is a beer from Munster, Indiana. Indiana has a pretty big craft beer scene for those that have not been to Indiana or experienced much Indiana. So yeah, the full name is Alpha King 3 Floyds Pale Ale. Has kind of a sort of amber ale type taste, I would say. Solid beer, and yeah, craft beer, great stuff. So for those big craft beer drinkers out there, that's something I would recommend.
Okay. Bob, why don't we kick it over to you? You can talk us about the unique sport of the week. What's happening out there?
Well, this fits in with the discussion we've already had today. I wanted to talk about darts. The Welshman, Gervin Price, won his second straight European Tour Open Championship in darts. He's been a phenom across the European Premier League in darts for the last 5 years. What's particularly interesting, in light of his recent back-to-back championships, has been his discussion of what helped him along the way. He said he made a dietary change about a year ago and switched to gluten-free. He admits he's not certain whether that has anything to do with his performance, but it may have helped him psychologically. In any case, he won the final against a Dutchman by a score of 8-4 to capture the championship. So he's our big star of the week, and we mustn't forget that darts is a sort of a sport. You may not remember, John, but many years ago, back in the house in the basement, when we had a dartboard up there, there was a stretch when you and I were playing darts for a couple of days straight on, just because we made up all kinds of games, invented them, just kept throwing darts. by the second or third day, my form had completely broken down. I could barely hit the dartboard. So at some point, you do tax your muscles and fatigue sets in.
Sometimes the better athlete is the better dart thrower. No question about it.
I seem to recall we had a phrase, spastic arm disease. Does anyone else recall this?
Yes, I do recall that. Yeah, it was your arm just is useless. Now, does that happen to golfers?
So I recall when it came to the dartboard, it was also customary to cut out pictures of athletes who played sports that you didn't like. So, for example, Bob, you're not a real fan of the Green Bay Packers, so there'll be pictures of Ray Nitschke and Bart Starr cut out of the newspaper and placed on the dartboard, and you would proceed just to pound holes in them with the darts.
That's true. Vince Lombardi, though, was my favorite target.
He was your favorite target. He was also a tremendous man. I can tell you that. Okay.
I think the fact that you chose to speak about darts as a sport tonight should erase any further debate about golf.
They're so much alike, I know.
Okay. All right, Charlie, you want to walk us through predictions? What were the results from last week, and what are we looking at for the coming weeks?
All right. Well, to summarize a little bit here, I'm going to skip past who picked what against the spread, but by and large, if you went with the favorites, you did pretty well. 4 out of the 6 of us, myself, Bobby, Ben, and Bob, went with San Diego State and UConn to get to the final, and all 4 of us also picked UConn as the winner. And a couple of you picked, I think Bob and Ben each picked UConn to win by 10, which is reasonably close. So you guys did the best. John, I think you kind of went with a bit of a flyer, maybe trying to improve your personal ratings or something. And you had a Miami FAU final, which obviously did not come to fruition. But I thought it was kind of a bold effort on your part.
Appreciate that. All for the good of the game.
Yep. So for this week, we move our attention to the Masters. And this will be one of the more interesting Masters in that 18 of the 88 players are from the Live Tour, which, as John pointed out before, has created quite a bit of dissension in the sport. And for some of our predictions this week, we'll try to highlight some of the head-to-head matchups between Live guys and PGA guys. So let me lead off with my predictions, and then I'll turn to you guys to follow up. So first one would be between the top 3 guys in the sport today, the top 3 in the official world rankings, those being Scottie Scheffler, Rory McIlroy, and Jon Rahm. I'm going to go with McIlroy. Rahm has not been in great form in the majors. He was out of the top 10 in all 4 of the majors last year. Rory knocked off Scheffler a couple weeks ago in the match play. Rory, if he wins, he will then have his grand slam of all 4 majors in his pocket. So I like Rory's chances this time around. Next, we've got Cam Smith against Jordan Spieth. Cam from the Live Tour. He's a little bit out of form. He finished 29th out of 48 in this past weekend's Live tournament in Orlando. So I'm going to take Jordan Spieth, who's been playing pretty steady of late. Got Dustin Johnson from the Live against Justin Thomas, JT. As much as I hate to take the Live guys, I'm going to take DJ on this one. He played pretty well in Orlando, and he's a previous winner at the Masters. Koepka against Tiger. Koepka, in my opinion, is the biggest ass on the Live Tour. I think he was an ass before he left. He's kind of a bigger ass now. But he did win this last weekend in Orlando. And the weather conditions aren't setting up real well for Tiger, so I'm going to go with Koepka. And finally, for overall winner of the tournament, I'm going back to Rory. I think this is his year. Benny, what do you think?
Well, it's very tough There's a lot of great golfers out there in the world today, but you have to choose some. So, I went with Scheffler over Rob McIlroy. I have Cam Smith over Spieth. I have Dustin Johnson over Justin Thomas. I have Tiger Woods over Koepka, and I think Scheffler is going to win it all. So,
John, let's keep it going around the horn your way.
Okay. Of the big three there, I think you got to go the guy who's red hot right now. I think it's back to Scheffler. He's got a great game. I would love to see McIlroy complete the Grand Slam. I just think that Scheffler's in a better position with his game right now. You also mentioned, the weather might be an issue this week. Scheffler's young and seemingly very unflappable, so I like him. When it comes to Cam Smith versus Spieth, I see Cam Smith as the only live golfer who's got a shot at winning the tournament. I think he'll probably be in pretty good form. I'd be surprised if he doesn't take Spieth down. DJ versus JT. Justin Thomas is a superior golfer at this point. DJ does not compete on the competitive circuit. I think you guys get these guys on the Masters course in that kind of setting. I think it's really going to show that these guys are not ready to play. Koepka versus Tiger. I would love to put my money on Tiger. I think he's the more skilled player, and certainly more fans would like to see him win. But Tiger's health against a younger Koepka, I give Koepka the nod. Though I could see Koepka imploding here. I don't know if he's got the mental toughness to really perform well. Overall winner, I'm back to Scotty Scheffler. I think he's the guy to beat. Love to see him win. I think golf would be very, very excited to see Scheffler win the Masters again.
Nick, what do you think?
Sure. I think overall kind of consistent themes. Not too hot and live tour guys. I think this will be a bit of a competitive spike to their system, playing in a more regulated tournament style. With that said, I've got Jon Rahm over Scheffler, McIlroy. Busy week for Scotty Scheffler. There's a reason you don't see guys repeat very often at the Masters. And then until we see McIlroy break through, I think those demons will persist at Augusta. Like I said, in terms of PGA Tour over Live Tour guys, I've got Spieth over Cam Smith, JT over DJ, and then Tiger over Koepka, and more of a betting against Koepka pick. I think we have a kind of high floor, low ceiling expectation for Tiger, but I expect Koepka to be below that. And then a guy to win it all. I guess he's been kind of promoted as the next Larry Bird of golf. Will Zalatoris. We'll see. Make a
You're
showing.
not worried that Will's not known as a very good putter.
Until this week, he's with some wet greens this weekend. I don't think it's possible much.
Bobby?
All right. So I have Jon Rahm regaining his form and beating out Scheffler and McIlroy. I have Jordan Spieth over Cam Smith. Dustin Johnson over Justin Thomas. And I have Tiger over Koepka. Tiger, that's a course he knows real well and has had a lot of success at. Overall winner, I have Hideki Matsuyama to take his second green jacket. He's always performed well at Augusta for the most part. And he's, playing pretty well over this last stretch. He, placed fifth at the Players and played pretty well at Valero after a late charge. So I think his game is in about the right place, and Augusta seems to be a place he likes.
Interesting. He's a little bit below the radar this week too. I like the pick. Bob, to you.
All right. Well, I think Rory McIlroy goes all the way, wins the whole thing. So he obviously is going to win among that threesome. Smith, Dustin Johnson, Koepka. I'd love to support Tiger. I'm not expecting that to happen. My one connection to golf is through sentimental feelings towards the Masters. I don't know why. I think their advertising has always been effective, and the post competition ritual with the green jacket and so on and so forth. And I can remember from a kid, watching my grandfather or watching with my grandfather as Arnold Palmer would win tournaments, and so there's a bit of a sentimental attachment there. And I think in this case that leads to my pick of McIlroy winning another green check, or rather completing his set.
Okay, I know we also want to do some picks this week on the Frozen Four. Bobby, I'm going to kick it to you to set the stage, if you would.
Absolutely. So yeah, it should be a fun Frozen Four this weekend. I will be there in Tampa with my dad, so it should be a lot of fun. Hoping the Gophers can pick up their first title since 2003. We are definitely due. But a couple great matchups. So you have Minnesota taking on Boston University in a rematch of the 1971 national championship, in which BU won. So hopefully we can get revenge on that one. And then you have Michigan taking on Quinnipiac in the other semifinal. Mostly chalk this year in college hockey. We got 3 1 seeds and a 2 seed that advanced to the Frozen Four. And the Big Ten performed really well. We got 2 Big Ten teams in the Frozen Four. And in the first round, Big Ten teams outscored their opponents 36-4. So Big Ten overall looking like the best conference in college hockey at the moment, but it has been a while since the Big Ten won a title. So we'll see what happens. This weekend, as far as my picks are concerned, I have the Gophers taking down Boston University. It'll be a tough matchup, but the Gophers are so talented. Got 2 of the 3 Hobie Baker finalists for College Hockey Player of the Year are Gophers, and I think this is the best team the Gophers have had since their last national championship. So BU is dangerous. They have Lane Hudson, one of the arguably the best defensemen in college hockey. But I think the Gophers get that done. In the game between Michigan and Quinnipiac, this one will be interesting. 2 pretty different styles. Quinnipiac, generally has more of an older team, and they play a more defensive style. They have, a pretty good goalie in Yaniv Peretz, but then again, he's playing in the ECAC, and some of those numbers he's been putting up is because he's had some games against teams like Dartmouth and Yale, which aren't exactly in your top tier of college hockey. So I think his numbers might be a little bit skewed. Michigan is real formidable. They beat Minnesota in the Big Ten title game, loaded with talent. They have Adam Fantilli, who might be the favorite to win the Hobie Baker. Some of their issues have been with consistency and problems with discipline. So it's possible they could shoot themselves in the foot and Quinnipiac could take this, but I like Michigan getting by them. And then that gets the heavyweight matchup of Minnesota and Michigan in the national championship. And I don't see the Gophers losing to Michigan twice in a row. So I take the Gophers to pick up our first title since 2003, and Bobby comes home from Tampa happy. With that, I'll push it on to my dad to make his picks.
Okay. Well, I see this to a significant degree the way Bobby does. I would note that I actually saw Minnesota win a national championship in 1979 in Detroit. They beat North Dakota in the final. The other 2 teams in that Frozen Four were Dartmouth and New Hampshire. Dartmouth took the consolation game, which they still had then for 3rd place. I see Minnesota beating BU in a tough game. I think Quinnipiac may upset Michigan. Michigan scored a slew of goals last weekend, and I think the change of pace that Quinnipiac's going to throw at them is going to create a lot of pressure. And if Quinnipiac gets a lead, they're very hard to catch because they play lockdown defense, and they pull back, they flood the neutral zone, and make it very hard to get into your offense. And I do see Minnesota winning the final because Minnesota will find a way to score first, and that will take Quinnipiac out of their game. The Gophers are the best team. They're the most talented on paper. The Frozen Four is fairly unpredictable historically, but I think this year the #1 team wins.
Very good. On to you, Charlie. I know you've been paying real close attention all season. So what have you got for us?
Well, I've spent a lot of time on this one. I'm going to go with Minnesota because they're number one in the country. I'm going to go with Quinnipiac over Michigan because I don't like anything about Michigan. And then I'm going to go with Quinnipiac winning the whole thing because I think they have a really cool sounding name.
The Quinnipiac Bobcats, indeed. Yes. All right. Benny, what have you got?
Well, it was interesting. I have seen Quinnipiac play before in the national championship game. I saw them in Frozen Four in Pittsburgh. I believe it was, I forget, 2018 or something like that. But 2013, close enough. Only 5 years off, so that's the same thing. Anyway, they've never won a national title. And I think Bobby makes good points about them not typically playing the best teams in the country during the regular season. So I think that Michigan's going to beat them. I think that we're going to get a Michigan-Minnesota final, which should be fun and intense. But I think Minnesota will probably ultimately win 3-2 would be my score projection. So
good. All right. John, unfortunately, Wisconsin Badgers didn't quite make it this year. But who do you have taking the Frozen Four?
First of all, I find it mind-boggling that the Gophers have not been able to win a national title in 20 years. There's just no way to explain that. But looking at this tournament, I think you've got a Big Ten sweep in the first round. And you get to go to the final. It's going to be a matter of, can the Gophers defense hold up? If the Gophers defense can hold up through 30 minutes to 40 minutes of this game, I think they can win a low scoring affair. If Michigan breaks out early, it could be decisive the other direction. But just because it's been so long since the Gophers have taken open the Hobie Baker, I really, really hope the Gophers do it. And I'm predicting that they will.
Well, yeah, I hope we get the Hobie Baker winner and the title, certainly.
Excuse me, title.
And but it has been a long time. The Gopher defense, it is probably the deepest I've ever seen in college hockey. Mike Kester is battling an injury, so I'm hoping he'll be able to come back because he's in the top four. But yeah, defensive battle would be interesting. I think a 6-5 game could be more likely with all the firepower these teams have. But both teams have goalies that can get hot, so anything is possible. Nick, what do you think?
Sure. Maybe we saw some dominance from the Big East in the NCAA men's tournament in basketball. And the same here in the Big Ten for men's hockey. I think that's going to continue to a Minnesota-Michigan final, where I've got Michigan over Minnesota winning. They got the best player. I think they'll close it out.
Yeah, Adam Fantilli, the freshman, he's had an incredible season. I think he is the favorite to win the Hobie Baker, leading scorer in the country. And Michigan has a longer drought than Minnesota. Michigan hasn't won since 1998. So if either of those teams win, it will break a long streak. So should be a fun weekend.
Okay, let's move on to our special segment here where everyone brings forth an interesting tidbit of what's going on in the world of sports and your perception of how you see it. Okay, Benny, you ready to go?
Yeah, so we have the NBA playoffs will be kicking off not too long from now, only a few games left in the regular season. Should be interesting. I think that just an early projection, though, I think that we could be looking at a Suns Celtics final. So stay tuned for that. I know Nick does not like that, but it's okay, Nick. You just have to get over it. But anyway, so that's all I really have for today. But stay tuned. Should be an interesting NBA playoffs. Western Conference especially will be crazy, and Eastern Conference has some pretty good teams. So should be fun.
Okay, Nick, how about you?
Yeah, I think Benny's very, very close with his projection. I think we're probably going to see a rematch of the 2021 finals between the Bucks and the Suns. But I'm sure it's going to be a great Eastern Conference finals, one that'll be remembered. nonetheless won by the Bucks. Other NBA news, a new collective bargaining agreement was passed this past week. A couple interesting things. As you all know, the NBA has an 82-game season. We're seeing all-stars playing only 80% of those 82 games. So some incentives were passed, notably to be eligible for all NBA or MVP awards, to play at least 65 games. So hopefully that gets more of our best players playing more of the games. Something else notable that was passed in the CBA was that marijuana is no longer going to be on the drug list for drug tests for that season. So may affect some of your favorite players. You may not be aware of that, but however it is, it's no longer part of the policy.
Okay. Bobby, what have you got?
So briefly sticking with the NBA here, the Sacramento Kings qualified for the playoffs for the first time since 2006. They actually had the longest stretch of any of the four major professional sports leagues of not making the playoffs. So that great distinction now falls on the New York Jets, who have not made the playoffs since 2010. Benny, how are you feeling about that with your Jets now holding that on?
Well, if you think about it, it's really not that long of a time. I mean, 13 years is really isn't that long. So I'm actually surprised there's not someone with a longer streak than that. But it's certainly disturbing. But hopefully with Aaron Rodgers, once he gets traded to the Jets, now that he's out of his cave, I'm hoping that that can break that streak, but we'll see. Maybe Lamar Jackson's could be still on the market by then as well. But hopefully they figure out something. Obviously, the Jets quarterback situation has been historically bad. Probably the last really, really good quarterback was Joe Namath, which is saying something. So for those older folks on the podcast who actually saw him playing shortly after the Civil War, I believe. But yeah, so.
Broadway Joe, nobody quite like him. Bob, what have you got for us?
Well, for the NBA, I think Boston and Milwaukee are probably appear to be the strongest teams. Boston won handily in a game 5 or 6 days ago, but I would note the Bucks were playing their 5th game in 7 days, which makes an enormous difference. I think I've got to put my money on the Bucks to go all the way. I was going to make a note about NCAA lacrosse. They're only midway through the season, but it looks like it's going to be a free-for-all. Last year, Maryland was supreme and completely dominant, and went almost unchallenged through the tournament. This year, it's a very different look, and a lot of the usual suspects are congregating near the top. Duke, Notre Dame, Virginia, Cornell, Maryland, and Johns Hopkins is back. I'm happy to report, prowling around in the top 10. So it looks to be an interesting season. And speaking of sports, I would argue that lacrosse is maybe the most entertaining sport of all to watch. It's really amazing. The skill, the speed, the action, the scoring, it's extraordinary.
That's very interesting. And normally you think of sports that are very entertaining, farewell on TV. Maybe lacrosse just hasn't found its niche yet. Charlie, what do you got?
Well, back to golf one more time, given that it's Masters week, but in response to the extreme levels of power and athleticism that have been put on display by today's golfers, the ruling bodies of the sport, the United States Golf Association and the Royal and Ancient, have proposed a rule that would require golfers in elite competitions to utilize a ball that would go anywhere from 15 to 30 yards less far compared to the ball used today. What's happening is the elite athletes that are currently playing the game are rendering some of the more traditional golf courses obsolete. Interestingly, the initial feedback from tour players was largely quite negative, but the two loudest and most respected voices among the game, Rory McIlroy and Tiger Woods just today, have both come out in favor of making that change to the golf ball, which would go into effect in 2026.
Thank you, Charlie. You know, it's very interesting because I know part of the fear is the players are getting so long that they're rendering a lot of old classic golf courses obsolete. And this is one way of making sure the game is protected and wonderful golf courses around the world are still relevant. So it's very important. Also, right now in Augusta, Georgia, we're having the Champions Dinner, which is honoring Scotty Scheffler for winning the championship last year. There's probably a lot of tension in that room because you look at what's going to happen in the next 5 days in Augusta could well determine the future of golf. Very important from a PGA standpoint, the PGA players fare well. Probably even more important from a live golf standpoint, that some of their players register good scores and place well in the tournament. So there's a lot on the line with professional golf right now. It's going to be a very, very interesting week. Okay, that's the way we see it. Thank you for joining us for our third Sportscast, Tuesday, April 4th, 2023. Another fantastic week in sports. Thanks, everyone.